Well, I'm back with Greg Byworth. Now, I appreciate this is probably becoming boring. In fact, it rather obviously is becoming boring. And I should make up my mind, I suppose, what exactly occurred on the 20th of December 1989, but of course I can't, because I wasn't there at the time that it occurred. The thing I am certain of is that my mother was murdered. The other thing that I'm certain of is that my father was there at the time, and I'm also certain that he did not call a doctor or an ambulance or any help of any kind. And I'm also certain that I am the only person he rang. And all of those things apply equally to the death of Fiona Green. Except that in the case of Fiona Green, I know there was a second man present, because that second man turned up at the inquest and was clearly named. But I am back to the topic of Greg Byworth, and I did make a video pointing out that he lived only 1.2 miles from my parents' house. And I have named him in connection with Amber Mattingly, which is easy to do and capable of proof. Amber Mattingly also died in one of these accidents that I don't personally believe were accidents, and never will. I do to and fro on my mother's death. And whilst that is not the sort of thing you're supposed to do if you want to convince an audience, I do feel it's the sort of thing you do if you think that you can change your mind, and you can also admit that you can never be completely certain of what took place, because you weren't there. I wasn't there at the time it happened. For some reason, when I went shopping with my dog this evening, it's very often when I'm outdoors with him that I do my best thinking, or at least that I think about it clearly. It dawned on me that Greg Byworth had one hell of a grudge against me. For all I know, after I turned in what I still call the pawn ring, because it's how I always thought of it, he probably did go to prison. He had form. Now, while I had no idea where he was for all the years that followed, he rather clearly did have an idea where I was. Sit down now. And this enormous grudge. And he had worked with Ken Browning and my ex-husband on the Lonely Hearts mag, which was the cover for I'll say again, the pawn ring. Greg Byworth, Ken Browning, and my ex-husband. Ken Browning was not the first to die following that. At around the time the police were actually interviewing me, I turned them in May 88. My mother-in-law died in June 88. I'm pretty sure it was the 8th of June. Which would have been at about the time that the plainclothes police were interviewing me in my home. Anyone who's ever seen a plainclothes policeman would know that they are not plainclothes. I'm fairly certain that anyone who saw them coming and going knew that they were policemen. Even though we were on first name terms. I think one of them was called Jeremy. I don't remember the name of the other one. It was all very informal and very friendly. And I've said again and again that my naivety stayed with me for many a year. I think actually it wasn't so much naivety as walking around in a little sort of pink cloud of fog. I don't know. Programmed. It did not occur to me that criminals of that type might possibly, conceivably, go around killing people in revenge for what I'd done. Still, within 1 month of my report, my mother-in-law was dead. Well, actually, by that time, ex-mother-in-law. And my ex-husband, this is fact, so I have nothing to worry about, inherited her house, being the only child, £100,000 house at that time in 1988. Sold it and moved to Cornwall. And I do know that a great many other people who were in this massive, massive ring also moved to Cornwall. Because no matter how well they hide their tracks, they do register births. And many of them were Truro births. Truro covering quite a wide area as a registration district. But in the south, I'll call it the south of Cornwall, the lower end of Cornwall. Yeah, because of the shape of the county, I get north and south slightly mixed up. How embarrassing. Mother-in-law first to go. February 22nd, 1989, Ken Browning went at my home. I don't care what the hell his death certificate says. Don't know why it says it was at the General Hospital. It was at my home. Now, who would be the first person that Greg Byworth would turn on, apart from me? Ken Browning. Because it was Ken Browning who told me. And if Ken Browning hadn't told me, I couldn't have told anyone either. Even then, I did not believe that Ken died of natural causes, and I still don't. At the time, all I thought was, well, he can't testify now. How convenient. I think it was more than that. I think it was revenge. And I think Greg Byworth had a hand in it. And then we come to the third person who was in that little cover for the porn ring. The Lonely Hearts Club. My husband, again, my ex-husband, who knew that. Call it trauma bonding then. As much as I sometimes hated my mother, I also adored her. We'd been like Siamese twins for years and years. And I was her only company, she was my only company. Donkey's years. I had actually said to my husband, this is 1989, I did stop drinking in 1985, but I had said to my husband, if there is one thing that could drive me back to drink, it would be my mother's death. Well, all Bob Webkin had to do was pass that information on to Greg Byworth. And they did remain in touch after that. I now know this for a fact. So, I come back again to the possibility that Greg Byworth could have walked down my parents' slope into their home, approached my mother's chair from behind, and suffocated her to death. And, okay, that would have taken 5 minutes by my father's account. And He then leaves again. Actually, would anyone notice the car driving off? Were my neighbours quite that observant on a dark December evening? The day before the shortest day. Or for that matter, he could have left on foot. 1.2 miles. It is a possibility. And it is also a possibility that my father, being a member of this bloody ring, knew that other people, as well as my mother, could die, not least him. Sorry, but he was number one to himself. When did we get a landline, or when did they get a landline? 1986. My mother's health was not brilliant. She had been unwell on and off from December 1980. But when did they get a landline put in? After he had heart surgery on the 14th of July, 1986. And I do know the exact date, because that's the third time, actually, that it has come up. And I know what date it is. The significance of it. That would still leave me with a little conundrum as to Fiona. But there again, I don't know what Greg Byworth had against Emma Mattingly either. And because I don't know what was going on in the ring, I have no idea what he might have had against Fiona. Except that she was about to get her children back, and I don't think any member of that ring wanted that to happen. She had come off drugs, she was about to get her kids back. And the kids were worth money to them. Anyway, I cannot clearly... Yes, I can. Of course I can. I've already tied Greg Byworth to Fiona. Because of Facebook friends. He knew her stepfather. So again, I'm left with the question as to why my father phoned me and nobody else, but... especially if it's true that, by that time, he did know he had terminal cancer. My brother insists he did. And yet my daughter and I were both told he had diverticulitis. I would still be left with the question of why my father then tacked Fiona's crucifix upside down to his window frame. I would still have that question in my mind. Even if he did not commit the murders himself, he was there on both occasions, and perhaps, in fact, that is why he rang me. Perhaps he needed somebody to indirectly tell. I could sort of get my head around that. Doesn't really let him off the hook, in my opinion. And certainly the crucifix part. It was a gesture of defiance. But I do come back to my recent trip to Southampton. And the fact that, as it happens, on my father's birthday, what would have been his 100th birthday, I was in Romsey Abbey, and was of course reminded of the fact that he went in there on a number of occasions of his own volition after my mother's death and sat on a pew crying. He also worked for League of Friends at the hospital, as did I. We both used to go into hospital chapel. Not together necessarily. I used to go in on my own. And I did used to light candles for my mother. But I know he too went into the hospital chapel. Until my mother's death, my father had almost never entered a church of his own volition. So, although there are numerous motives present themselves to me for his killing my mother, numerous, such as selling the house, Ellen, access to Fiona and her children, moving closer to me and my daughters. I'm kind of back to thinking that perhaps Greg Byworth, who appears to have been a petty crook on the face of things, the only conviction I can currently get him on is a dodgy dog's home here in Wales, honest lass. What is it that we're supposed to look for when there's been a murder? Motive, he had that. Opportunity, he had that. What's the third one? Is it means? Well, that was easy. Can't remember the third one. I still don't think my brother and I can talk about this topic with any degree of success and remain reconciled. And I am not backing down in order to keep that reconciliation going. In fact, I'm not backing down. I'm not saying my father didn't do it. I am saying that it's possible that he was there while someone else did it. That does remain possible. And the someone else who springs most to mind to have the greatest motive, apart from my father, is Greg Byworth, who did know Amber Mattingly, and who did know the stepfather of Fiona Green, and who did well and truly have it in for me.